Owen Cross built a billion-dollar safari empire on the ruins of a poisoned village until the day he came face-to-face with the 8-year-old boy who couldn't breathe because of what he'd done. Before we dive into the story, take a moment and tell us where you're watching from. It helps new viewers find stories like this. Owen Cross built Africa's most exclusive safari empire by erasing inconvenient truths, including the village his flagship lodge destroyed and the environmental disaster it caused. When Amara, a local Maasai guide, confronts him with proof that his construction poisoned her 8-year-old son, Owen faces an impossible choice: protect the luxury empire that defines him, or publicly humble himself to save a child and restore a community he pretended never existed. A safari mogul dismisses a mother's sick child as an operational issue, until she opens a folder proving his luxury empire is what's killing her son. Tell me in the comments, would you sacrifice your billion-dollar empire to save one dying child? The conference room at Oasis Ridge Lodge commanded a view of the Masai Mara that travel magazines called Africa's crown jewel. Endless savanna where elephants and giraffes moved like living poetry against the dawn. Owen Cross barely noticed. His attention was fixed on quarterly projections that would determine whether cross-continental luxury lodges went public at the valuation he'd promised investors. "The numbers are extraordinary," James Rutherford said, spreading financial reports across the hand-carved mahogany table. "Occupancy at 93%, average booking value up 40% year over year. Owen, your father would be proud." Owen felt the familiar hollow ache at the mention of his father. 3 years gone, and he was still trying to prove he could build something bigger, better, more impressive than the modest safari company his father had started 40 years ago. "We're just getting started. The Tanzania expansion breaks ground next month, and I'm in negotiations for properties in Botswana and Zambia." The knock on the conference room door was sharp, urgent. Marcus Cross, Owen's half-brother and COO, appeared with his usual corporate smoothness slightly ruffled. "Owen, we have a situation. One of the guides is demanding to speak with you, says it's urgent regarding her son." "I'm in the middle of—" "She's refusing to leave, creating a scene in the main lodge in front of guests." Marcus's tone carried disapproval. "It's the Kimathi woman. You know how these locals can be about perceived grievances." Owen's jaw tightened. He built Cross-Continental on exceptional service and zero tolerance for disruptions to guest experience. "Handle it, Marcus. That's what I pay you for." "I tried. She specifically demanded you." Marcus lowered his voice. "She's got documentation she says proves the lodge is making her kid sick. It's nonsense, obviously, but with the investors here—" Owen stood abruptly. His 6'2" frame and natural authority had closed deals in boardrooms across 3 continents. He could certainly handle one upset employee. "I'll deal with it. 5 minutes." Amara Kimathi stood in the lodge's soaring main pavilion like a still point in a hurricane. Around her, wealthy guests in designer safari wear pretended not to stare while sipping Ethiopian coffee that cost more per cup than Amara made in a day. She wore her guide uniform, khaki shirt and pants, sturdy boots, but her posture carried a dignity that expensive clothes couldn't manufacture. Owen recognized her immediately. She'd been leading safaris here for 2 years, one of the best guides they had. Guests specifically requested her because she knew the land the way most people knew their own homes, could track a leopard by the faintest disturbance in grass, could explain ecological relationships in ways that made the bush come alive with meaning. "Mrs. Kimathi." Owen's voice carried just enough authority to remind everyone watching who held power here. "My office. Now." She followed him down the corridor lined with photographs of his father with various African presidents and conservation leaders, the legacy Owen was constantly trying to honor and surpass. His office was all windows overlooking the waterhole where animals gathered at sunset, a view that had closed million-dollar deals. "I understand you're upset about your son," Owen began, his tone calibrated to convey sympathy while maintaining boundaries. "But creating disruptions during guest hours is unacceptable. If this is a personal matter, my son can't breathe." Amara's voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath Owen heard something that made him pause. Not hysteria. Certainty. "Quito has been in the clinic 3 times this month. Dr. Omondi says his respiratory function is deteriorating. He's 8 years old, and he carries an inhaler everywhere because being outside, in the place where his ancestors lived for generations, is slowly suffocating him." Owen shifted his weight, already calculating how to redirect this conversation back to operational channels. "I'm sorry to hear that, but health issues should be addressed through HR and our employee medical benefits." "This isn't a benefits issue, Mr. Cross. It's your lodge." Owen had signed off on the relocation housing budget without visiting the actual structures. The line item had read, "Modern housing units, 200 families," and he'd thought it sounded generous. Now, seeing the soulless rows of identical structures baking under the African sun, he understood what had been lost. Amara's unit was identical to all the others except for the small garden she'd coaxed to life outside, native plants and herbs staging a quiet rebellion against the standardization. Inside, the space was small but meticulously kept. Woven mats, a few family photographs, children's drawings taped to walls. Quito sat on a thin mattress, drawing in a notebook with colored pencils worn down to nubs. He looked up when they entered, and Owen saw intelligence and caution in eyes far too old for an 8-year-old face. The boy's breathing was audibly labored, each breath a conscious effort. "Mama?" Quito's voice was thin. "Is this the man from the big hotel?" "This is Mr. Cross, Ndito. He wanted to meet you." Owen knelt to the child's level, unsure what to say. His business education hadn't included courses in confronting the human cost of your success. "Hello, Quito. Your mother tells me you're an artist." Quito showed him the drawing, a family of elephants at a waterhole, rendered with surprising detail and care. "I draw what I remember. Before my breathing got bad, Mama used to take me on walks to see the animals. Now the walking is too hard." "What do you remember?" Owen asked quietly. "When we lived in the old village, I could hear the lions at night. Grandfather said the land was teaching me to listen." Quito took a labored breath, and Owen heard the wet rattle in the child's chest. "Now I mostly hear the construction machines and the generator from the lodge, and my inhaler." The child pulled out his inhaler as if to demonstrate, taking 2 measured puffs. The casual necessity of it, the way this 8-year-old had integrated medical intervention into his daily routine, struck Owen harder than any financial report could. "Grandfather used to say the land and the people take care of each other," Quito continued, his small fingers tracing the elephants he'd drawn. "But I think maybe we forgot how to take care of the land, and now it can't take care of us." Owen felt something crack in his chest, the careful armor he'd built between himself and the consequences of his ambition. This wasn't an operational problem to be solved. This was a child paying the price for Owen's ruthless efficiency and willful blindness. "Quito," Owen said carefully, "what if I told you I'm going to find out why you're sick and fix it? Would you believe me?" The boy studied him with unnerving directness. "Mama says rich people make a lot of promises. She says the promises are like morning mist. They look real but disappear when the sun comes up." Amara's hand rested on her son's shoulder. "Quito." "No, he's right." Owen stood, making a decision that would cost him everything he'd built, or transform it into something worth having. I've made promises disappear, but I'm going to keep this one, even if it costs me everything. Back at the lodge, Owen found Marcus entertaining the investors with carefully curated safari stories. His brother's smile faltered when he saw Owen's expression. "Owen, there you are. Mr. Rutherford was just saying, Marcus, I need every environmental report and community relations document from the expansion project, all of them, in my office in 1 hour." Marcus's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Owen, this isn't the time. We have investors. I'm aware. I'm also aware that we may have cut corners that are making children sick." Owen's voice carried across the pavilion, drawing stares. "So you're going to get me those documents, or I'm going to start making phone calls to find out why you've been hiding them from me." The silence that followed was electric. James Rutherford set down his coffee cup with careful deliberation. "Owen, perhaps we should discuss this privately." An hour later, Owen sat in his office with documents spread like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus stood against the window, his corporate polish giving way to something uglier. "You want to know why I didn't install the water filtration system?" Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "Because it would have cost $3 million and delayed the lodge opening by 4 months. You were the one demanding we open on schedule to hit the investor timeline. I demanded we open on schedule while meeting our commitments. Our commitments were to investors, not to some village sitting on premium safari land." Marcus's mask was fully off now. Father was too sentimental. All those handshake deals and promises about partnerships, that's not how modern hospitality works. You want to build an empire? You have to make hard choices. Owen felt rage building, clean and clarifying. Hard choices or convenient cruelties? There's a difference. The difference is profitability. Our margins are the best in the industry because I trimmed the fat Father could never bring himself to cut. Community programs, environmental extras, health clinic funding, those are nice-to-haves, not essentials. An 8-year-old boy can't breathe because of our trimmed fat, Marcus. An 8-year-old boy we've never met, who has no legal claim on us, versus investors who've put in hundreds of millions expecting returns. Marcus leaned forward. "This is business, Owen. If you're too weak to handle it, maybe Father was wrong to leave control to you." The words hung in the air like poison. Owen recognized the truth he'd been avoiding. Marcus had been systematically undermining the values their father built the company on, betting that Owen was too focused on expansion to notice or care. "Get out." Owen's voice was quiet, deadly. "You're suspended, pending a full audit of every decision you've made in the last 3 years. Marcus's face went white, then red. "You can't be serious. I run operations for the entire company." "You ran operations. Past tense. Now get out before I have security escort you." After Marcus stormed out, Owen sat alone with the damning evidence. Water quality reports showing contamination levels that would never pass independent review. Budget memos where Marcus had systematically eliminated every community benefit program. Emails discussing how to manage the displaced villagers' complaints without actually addressing them. His phone buzzed. A text from Rutherford. "We need to talk. Not about the IPO. About your father." They met on the private terrace outside Owen's quarters, away from guests and staff. Rutherford looked older than his 60 years, weighted by something Owen couldn't name. "Your father and I had a conversation 3 months before he died," Rutherford began. "He was worried about the company's direction, about Marcus's influence over you, about whether the expansion was happening too fast, cutting too many corners. Owen felt the ground shifting beneath him. He never said anything to me. He didn't want to undermine your confidence. You were so driven to prove yourself, to build something bigger than he'd managed. He was proud of your ambition, but worried it would consume you. Rutherford pulled out a worn envelope. He asked me to give you this if you ever seemed to be losing your way. I think that time is now. The letter was in his father's handwriting, strong, clear strokes on thick paper. Owen, if James is giving you this, it means I'm gone and you're facing a choice between profit and principle. I know you, son. I know how hard you push, how desperately you want to prove yourself. But here's what I learned building this company. Luxury isn't about excluding people. Real luxury is creating beauty while honoring the land and the people who let us share it. Samuel Kamathi taught me that the land holds memory. Every decision we make gets written into that memory. When we take without giving back, when we profit from others' suffering, we're not building legacy. We're just accumulating debt that our children will have to pay. You don't have to be bigger than me, Owen. You have to be truer than your worst fears about yourself. Trust that the company I built, the values I tried to live, those are enough foundation. Build on truth, not shortcuts. Whatever choice you're facing, choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Choose the child over the profit margin. Choose becoming the man you're meant to be over protecting who you've been. I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you. You don't have to prove anything to me. Dad. Owen's hands shook as he read the words again. His father had known, had seen Owen's ambition turning into something destructive, and instead of forcing correction, he'd trusted Owen to find his own way back. He loved you, Owen. Rutherford's voice was gentle. But he knew that sometimes the people we love have to walk through fire to become who they're meant to be. Owen looked out at the Mara, the land his father had loved with such fierce respect. Somewhere in the relocated village, Quito was struggling to breathe. Somewhere in the corporate office, Marcus was probably planning his counterattack. Somewhere in boardrooms across the world, investors were calculating returns. And Owen had to choose. The next morning, Owen called an emergency meeting with the full board and investors. Word had spread about the confrontation with Marcus, and the conference room crackled with tension as 24 men and women in expensive suits gathered with coffee and suspicion. Thank you all for coming, Owen began. I'm going to tell you some things that may cause you to question your investment in Cross-Continental. I'm asking you to hear me out before making any decisions. He laid it out systematically, the way his father had taught him to present hard truths. The environmental violations, the ignored health crisis, Marcus's systematic dismantling of community commitments, the promises made and broken, the 8-year-old boy who couldn't breathe. The bottom line, Owen said, meeting each investor's eyes in turn, is that we built extraordinary profits on a foundation of broken promises and children's suffering. The question now is what we're going to do about it. A hedge fund manager Owen barely knew spoke first. With all due respect, Mr. Cross, this sounds like a crisis of conscience that could cost investors hundreds of millions. What you're describing, environmental remediation, healthcare funding, community restoration, those expenses would destroy our margins and tank the IPO. You're absolutely right, Owen agreed. It would delay the IPO by at least 2 years and reduce the valuation by probably 40%. It would mean abandoning the rapid expansion plan I sold you on. It would mean fundamentally restructuring how we operate. Then why are we having this conversation? Another investor demanded. Cut Marcus loose if you need a scapegoat, pay some settlements quietly and move on. That's how you handle operational issues. Rutherford stood slowly. Because some operational issues are actually moral catastrophes. And because Owen's father built this company on the principle that how you make money matters as much as how much you make. With respect, James, Owen's father is dead. This is a new era of hospitality, an era where we poison children for profit margins. Rutherford's voice cut like steel. I invested in Cross Continental because Malcolm Cross proved you could build a world-class business while honoring the land and people. If we abandon that now, we're not investors. We're looters. The room erupted in arguments. Some investors sided with Rutherford. Others demanded Owen step down if he couldn't stomach necessary business decisions. The CFO tried to present alternative scenarios that minimized financial impact. Owen let them argue, watching the battle for his company's soul play out in real time. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Amara. Keto in emergency clinic. Can't stabilize his breathing. Dr. Amandi says he needs hospital in Nairobi. The world went silent. Owen stood abruptly. I need to go. A child is dying, and I'm going to make sure he gets to the hospital. We'll continue this discussion when I return. Owen, the investors, the CFO began. The investors can wait. A child's life can't. Owen was already moving toward the door. James, I'm putting you in charge until I get back. Anyone who wants to pull their investment, I understand, but I'm not going to let that boy die while I sit here protecting profit margins. He found Amara in the lodge's medical clinic, holding Keto as Dr. Omandi worked to stabilize his oxygen levels. The boy's lips had a blue tinge that made Owen's stomach turn to ice. I've called for an air ambulance to Nairobi, Dr. Omandi said grimly, but it's going to be expensive. I don't care about the cost. Owen's voice was absolute. Get him on that helicopter. Mr. Cross, the air ambulance service requires payment authorization up front. $50,000. Owen pulled out his phone and made the wire transfer without hesitation. Done. What else does he need? As they waited for the helicopter, Owen sat beside Amara. She hadn't spoken to him, all her focus on her son's labored breathing, whispering reassurances in Ma that Owen couldn't understand but felt in his chest. I'm sorry, Owen said quietly. For all of it. For not seeing. For not caring enough to look. For building success on your suffering. Amara didn't look at him. Sorry doesn't help Keto breathe. No, but action might. Owen pulled out his phone and sent a series of texts to his legal team. I'm authorizing emergency environmental remediation, full independent testing of the water supply, temporary housing with proper filtration systems for every family in the relocated village, complete medical coverage for every child showing respiratory symptoms. How much will that cost? Amara's voice was flat. Conservative estimate? 15 to 20 million? Probably more. Now she looked at him, searching his face for the lie. Why? Your investors will crucify you. Because my father taught me that some debts can't be avoided, only paid. And because I'd rather lose everything I've built than look at your son and do nothing. The helicopter arrived in a thunder of rotor wash. As the medical team loaded Keto, he reached out a small hand toward Owen. You're going to fix it? For real? Owen took the child's hand gently. For real. I promise. Even if it costs me everything. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Keto toward care that might save his life. Owen stood with Amara in the settling dust, both of them watching until the aircraft disappeared into the African sky. I'm coming with you to Nairobi, Owen said. Whatever Keto needs, however long it takes. Your investors can wait, can leave, can do whatever they want. Owen turned to face her fully. But I'm done putting profit ahead of people. I'm done being the man who looks away. If I lose the company fixing this, then I never deserved it in the first place. For the first time since he'd met her, Amara's guarded expression cracked. You mean that? I do, though it's probably going to take a while to prove it. Owen managed a grim smile. I'm learning that words are cheap, especially my words. But I'm going to show you, show Keto, show your community, that some promises don't disappear like morning mist. 3 days later, Owen stood in the Nairobi hospital where Keto had been stabilized and was slowly recovering. The air ambulance, the specialized treatment, the round-the-clock care, the bills were staggering. Owen had paid them all without hesitation. But the real reckoning was happening back at the lodge, where James Rutherford had called an emergency shareholder meeting. Owen joined via video conference, appearing on screens in the main conference room where investors and board members gathered with lawyers and accusations. Mr. Cross, the lead investor's lawyer began, your recent actions have constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. You've committed company funds to open-ended environmental remediation without board approval. You've publicly acknowledged legal liability that could expose us to massive lawsuits. You've suspended the COO without proper process. Shareholders are demanding your removal. Owen looked at the screen full of angry faces and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Absolute clarity about who he was and what mattered. You're right, he said calmly. I did all those things, and I'd do them again. The room erupted. Owen waited for silence. 3 years ago, my father died believing I would carry on his vision for this company, not just the profits, but the principles, partnership with local communities, environmental stewardship, building luxury that created value for everyone it touched, not just shareholders. Owen pulled out his father's letter and read it aloud. By the time he finished, some investors were shifting uncomfortably. Rutherford was openly crying. I lost my way, Owen continued. I got so obsessed with expansion and proving myself that I stopped seeing the human cost of my ambition. Marcus enabled that blindness because it was profitable. And you all invested because the returns looked spectacular, without asking how we achieved them. Mr. Cross, I'm not finished. Owen's voice carried the authority he usually reserved for closing deals. Here's what's going to happen. I'm authorizing a complete environmental audit of every cross-continental property. Any violations will be remediated immediately, regardless of cost. Every displaced community will receive the compensation and partnerships my father promised. Every child affected by our negligence will receive full medical care and compensation. That will bankrupt the company. No. It will cost us the IPO and delay expansion. But the company will survive. Smaller, humbler, but operating with integrity. Owen leaned toward the camera. And if you can't accept that, I'm prepared to buy out your shares at cost plus 10%. Take your money and invest in someone who'll give you spectacular returns without asking inconvenient questions about how they're achieved. The conference room descended into chaos. Some investors demanded immediate buyouts. Others argued that Owen's approach would tank property values. A few, including Rutherford, stood and applauded. Through the video feed, Owen saw the conference room doors open. Amara walked in, carrying documentation. Behind her came Dr. Omondi and 3 other community representatives. Mr. Cross gave me permission to attend this meeting, Amara said calmly, because he said if you're going to discuss my community's future, we should have a voice. She laid out photographs on the conference table, before and after images of the displaced village, medical records of sick children, water quality reports, documentation of every broken promise. You talk about profit margins and shareholder value, Amara said to the room full of investors. We talk about children who can't breathe, families who lost their homes, promises that disappeared like morning mist. Mr. Cross is offering you a choice. Be part of the solution, or take your money and go. But you don't get to profit from our suffering anymore. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Rutherford stood. I'm with Owen. Keep my investment, delay the IPO, do whatever it takes to make this right. Because I invested in Malcolm Cross's vision. And Owen just proved he's his father's son. One by one, some investors stood to join him. Others gathered their things and left, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits. When the dust settled, Owen had lost about 40% of his investors, but kept the ones who understood what the company was really meant to be. 6 months later, Owen stood in the rebuilt village that now sat on land returned to community ownership, with the lodge operating under a genuine partnership agreement. The prefab housing units had been replaced with traditional-style homes incorporating modern amenities and proper water filtration. A new health clinic stood where keto had almost died, fully funded by Cross Continental with Dr. Omondi as its director. The company had survived, but looked radically different. Smaller, slower growing, but profitable in ways that didn't require anyone to suffer. The Tanzania expansion had been postponed. The Botswana and Zambia projects were under community partnership review before any construction could begin. Owen had stepped down as CEO, retaining creative control, but hiring an operations director with deep experience in sustainable community tourism. Marcus had been fired and was facing potential criminal charges for environmental violations and fraud. Keto ran past, laughing with other children, his breathing finally clear after months of treatment and clean air. The boy waved at Owen before disappearing into the community center that now hosted classes, meetings, and celebrations. He asks about you constantly, Amara said, joining Owen in the shade of an acacia tree. Wants to know if the white man who kept his promise is coming to dinner. I'd be honored. Owen had learned to accept Amara's invitations without overthinking them, to show up, to listen, to build relationship rather than just transactions. They'd grown close over the months of remediation and rebuilding. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but genuine partnership. Amara had joined Cross Continental's board, representing community interests. She'd proven as fierce in protecting the land as Owen had once been in expanding across it. The new investors are asking about expansion again, Owen said. Small scale, community-led. Your uncle has land in Tanzania where he's proposing a partnership lodge. And what did you tell them? That we move at the community's pace, not the market's pace. That if it takes 5 years instead of 5 months, that's what it takes. Owen smiled. They weren't thrilled, but they stayed. Amara studied the rebuilt village, the clinic, the community center, the children playing without fear or illness. My grandfather used to say that the land teaches slowly, that patience and relationship are wealth money can't buy. Your grandfather was a wise man. He would have liked what you've become. Amara's hand found Owen's briefly, a gesture of partnership and possibility. Not the man who built the empire, the man who rebuilt himself. That evening, Owen joined Keto's family for dinner in their new home. The food was simple but abundant, shared with laughter and stories. Keto showed Owen his latest drawings, not just animals now, but people working together, building, healing, growing. This one's you, Keto said proudly, showing a picture of a tall figure planting trees alongside smaller figures. Dr. Patricia says, you're like the rain after the drought. First, everyone's suspicious because they've learned not to trust promises. But then things start growing again. Owen felt emotion tighten his throat. I'm just trying to keep promises my father made. And making new ones, Amara added quietly. That's the difference. Later, standing outside under stars that burned with impossible clarity above the Mara, Owen thought about the journey from that conference room where he'd demanded environmental documents to this moment of genuine peace and purpose. He'd lost the empire he'd been building, the rapid expansion, the spectacular IPO, the validation that he could exceed his father's achievements through sheer aggressive growth. But he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the ability to look at Keto without shame, to walk through the village without averting his eyes, to sleep without the weight of willful blindness pressing on his chest. His phone buzzed with an email from Rutherford. Board approved the Tanzania Community Partnership Project, moving forward at whatever pace the community determines. Also, some news articles you should see. Owen opened the attached links. Forbes. How one CEO chose conscience over profit and built something better. The Financial Times. Cross-Continental's radical restructuring points to new model for sustainable luxury. National Geographic. From environmental violator to conservation partner, one company's redemption story. The articles were flattering, but Owen knew the truth was messier than any headline could capture. He hadn't had a sudden moral awakening. He'd been dragged toward accountability by a brave woman who refused to accept excuses, and a sick child whose innocence had mirrored back his failures with unbearable clarity. Amara emerged from her home, carrying 2 cups of chai. She handed him one and stood beside him in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" she asked finally. Owen considered the question seriously. "I'm at peace, which is different than happy, but maybe better. I spent 3 years running from grief and guilt, trying to build something big enough to prove I was worthy of my father's legacy. Turns out the only way to honor him was to become small enough to see what I was doing to others." "Keto says you're his hero." Amara's voice was soft. "Do you know what he told Dr. Omondi? He said you're proof that rich people can stop making promises that disappear. That if even one can change, maybe others can too." That's a lot of faith for an 8-year-old to carry. He learned faith from watching his mother refuse to give up. Amara looked at Owen directly. "And from watching you choose to be humbled rather than right. That's rare, Owen, especially for men with your kind of power." Owen thought about the choice he'd faced in his office that day, with investors demanding he protect profits and a child struggling to breathe. The easier path would have been to minimize, settle quietly, move on. The harder path, the path his father's letter had called the harder right, had cost him billions in valuation, but given him back his soul. "I spent years trying to be bigger than my father," Owen said quietly. "Turned out I needed to be humbler than my worst self. Still working on that." Amara's hand found his again, warmer this time, less tentative. "We all are. The difference is, you're actually doing the work instead of just talking about it." In the village behind them, Keto and the other children were singing something in Ma, a traditional song about the land remembering and caring for those who care for it. Owen didn't understand all the words, but he felt their meaning in his bones. He'd come to Africa chasing his father's shadow, trying to build an empire worthy of the legacy he'd inherited. Instead, he'd found something his father had tried to teach him all along: that true wealth wasn't measured in properties or valuations, but in promises kept, communities honored, and children who could breathe freely under the same African sky their ancestors had watched for generations. The empire he'd lost had been built on sand and suffering. What he was building now, slowly, humbly, alongside people he'd once seen as obstacles, was built on something that would last. Not bigger than his father, not smaller. just true to the best parts of what his father had tried to teach him before Owen's ambition had drowned out the lesson. He looked at Amara, at the village spreading before them in the gathering dark, at Keto's laughter carrying on the evening breeze. And Owen Cross, who'd once measured success in quarterly returns and property acquisitions, finally understood what his father had meant about the land holding memory. Every choice they made was written into that memory, every broken promise, every act of conscience, every moment of humility or hubris, all of it recorded in the way the land responded, the way communities thrived or suffered, the way children breathed freely or struggled for air. He'd made terrible choices, written shameful chapters into that memory. But the land was patient, and memory allowed for redemption if you were willing to do the work. Owen was willing, not because it was profitable or impressive, but because he'd finally learned what his father had known all along. Some debts can only be paid by becoming the kind of person who stops accumulating them. And that journey, humbling and difficult as it was, felt like finally coming home.